Can unrelenting change be a good thing? It can if you're up for a new way to think about it and manage change. Oh, and in case you missed it, we're in a period of unimagined and unrelenting change. Let's have ourselves a pocket sized pep talk because today's guest tells me, although we're not very good at managing change, she's here to help.
A Pocket Sized Pep Talk, the podcast that can help energize your business and your life with a quick, inspiring message. Now, here's your host, Rob Jolles.
Today's guest, Erika Anderson, is the founding partner of Proteus International, a coaching, consulting, and training firm that focuses on leadership readiness. She served as a consultant and advisor to top executives at some pretty notable organizations, including Amazon, Spotify, and the Yale School of Public Health. She's the author of 4 best-selling books, is a popular leadership blogger, is the host of her own podcast, which is called the Proteus Leader Show. She's here to talk about her newest book, Change from the Inside Out, making you, your team, and your organization change capable. Welcome to the show, Erika.
Thanks. I love the way you say my bio.
I got to tell you, I'm sweating bullets over here, but it's quite an impressive bio. And just so everybody knows, I shortened it. There's a lot going on in there, and that's not just a blogger. That's a Forbes blogger. There's a lot of really good stuff in there. So you're out there, you're working it, and I love that. And I also love that you got a new book with a publisher that's might be new to you, but they're not so new to me, and that's Barrett Kohler. So let's start there. Okay, it came out a month ago. How's the launch been?
It came out, less than a month ago, late in October. It's going very well. The publicist that we're working with has been fantastic. And I think because change is such a big topic right now, I told my husband, I'm on 15 podcasts between now and the end of 2 weeks from now. So, a lot of people.
Oh, all right. Well, make sure you gargle. That's a lot of podcasts. So I know you're going to be interesting. So that works for me. And, Barrett Kohler, I have a very soft spot for them, and because I have a few different publishers, but just so you know, and you're early with them, they're by far my favorite publisher. So you've got some really nice
I feel that already. And I, like you, have a history of kind of wandering from publisher to publisher, trying to find my favorite. And I love the publisher of my last book, but they sold to a larger company. And so when I was finished with this book, I asked that woman, I said, who would you connect me to? And she said, go to Barrett Kohler. Yeah. And fortunately, they liked the book and we all loved each other. And it's a love fest. I love it.
Perfect. Last question, and I'll leave that. This is shop talk, folks, but real fast. Yeah. Who's your editor at Barrett Kohler?
Neil Millett.
Well, I think he's the best one there. That's my editor as well. So look what we just discovered. I'll give you a fun fact about Neil. He was a editor at Wiley. He left and became a forest ranger. And then he came back to the publishing business. Thank goodness. So you got a great one. All right, let's talk about this book. There's a lot of books on change out there. Yes. So, I'll bet you got this while you were walking around with your idea and your manuscript. What makes your approach unique?
So when I write books, what I'm always trying to do is crack some codes. I always pick complex topics, usually about leadership, that people are interested in, and try and unpack them and get down to some core ideas to make them easy to understand and easy to apply, because I'm really an empiricist. So the 2 things that I wanted to unpack when I was writing this book are, why is change so hard? Because change is hard. And how does an individual human being go through a change? Because we've had a change practice at Proteus for 10 years, and we have a wonderful 5-step model that works really well. But I wanted to get underneath that. So, and I think I answered those 2 questions in ways that are helpful to people and help individuals go through change and help them lead others through change.
Outstanding. Yeah, I saw when I was looking at some of your materials, I saw that you were quoting McKinsey and Company, and this is a number I just pulled from you. 70% of all change initiatives fail.
Yes.
So why?
Yeah.
How? That's crazy.
Exactly. So the McKinsey statistics are that 70% of change efforts fail to achieve their targeted results. So maybe they kind of get there, or it takes longer, or they fail outright, but 70%. And they say that the two main reasons are lack of employee buy-in and lack of management support, which is why I wanted to get underneath it. It's like, why are people not changing? Why are they not adopting the change? So can I share this with you?
Of
I
course.
found? Yeah, okay.
Hear it.
So here's what I found out about why change is so hard. I'm a big student of history, and I started thinking about this, and it's like, okay, let's think about history. And if you think about it clearly, until really recently, the life of a single human being did not change very much, right? So if you're 100 years ago, if your dad was a farmer, you're probably a farmer. If your dad was a pipe fitter, you're probably a pipe fitter. You grew up in the same town that your parents grew up in. You might have grown up in the same house that your parents grew up in. If you went to school, you went to the same school that your parents did, that your children would. Life until fairly recently was fairly unchanging. And when there was a change, it was generally a bad thing and a threat. It was a famine, or it was a war, or it was a plague. And so there's a concept called homeostasis that means returning to stable conditions for survival. And so we think of that mostly physiologically. You're too cold, you put on some clothes. You're too hot, you get in the air conditioning. You're hungry, you eat. You want to come back to what feels comfortable. But until very recently, homeostasis was an important and self-protective urge, also sociologically and economically and organizationally and politically. To come back to a previous known condition was generally the way to go, because change was dangerous and threatening, right?
Right.
So that's how we're wired for thousands of years, to think of danger when we see a change. So I thought, oh my God, no wonder change is so hard. It has always been hard. And we're now suddenly in this era where we don't really have that option, because change comes at us every day. I mean, forget the pandemic, change comes every day. And this has never been our experience as humans. So in a way, we need to rewire ourselves so that when a change comes at us, our first stance is neutral versus negative. We don't have to automatically assume the change is going to be good, because some changes are bad, but we can no longer afford to automatically assume that change is dangerous and a threat, which is what we have assumed historically. Does that make sense?
Makes complete sense. But ironically, as you're talking, I'm thinking one of the biggest challenges I've had in my career as a corporate trainer, which, about 40 years worth, is that sometimes in corporate America, they jump on the change wagon so fast and so hard that they don't implement the change. We call it the flavor of the month syndrome in training.
Absolutely.
And so what I did and what I've done is, through my career, not the first decade or so, but I actually, with many of my companies, I won't sign the contract unless part of the contract is, and I'm going to teach you not just how to do this process, but how to implement the process. I'm going to work with management. We're going to role play. We're going to work off a feedback model, because if it fails, we're going to go back to the consultant, aren't we? So that's been
and go back to the previous homeostasis. Go back to that previous known that feels comfortable and safe, right? That's why it doesn't get implemented. People just want to zoop back, and that leads right into the second code I cracked. Remember, I said, how do individual people go through change? So I thought and observed and talked to a lot of people, and what I discovered is this. You'll like this fun thing that we came to call the change arc. And so here's how that arc works. At the beginning, we call proposed change. When a change comes at us, there are always three things that we want to know. They're incredibly predictable. The first thing we want to know is, what does this mean to me? Right? What do I have to change? That's the first thing we want to know. Second thing we want to know is, why is this happening? Give me some reasons. Status quo is my preference. So give me some good reasons, so I'll even consider the idea, right? And then the third thing is, what will it look like when it's changed? And when I discovered this, it's really interesting. And one of the pieces of research I was doing when I did the book is, it turns out that a lot of neuropsychologists now think that our deepest fear is fear of the unknown.
Oh, yeah.
So right?
Oh, we
So
see it all the time in sales.
yes,
It paralyzes everyone.
paralyzes people. And so if you say, here's a change, and then the future is blurry, you don't give people that vision in the future, man, they're just going to zip right back to, well, then I don't want to do that. So as people, so that's the first thing. And we start to ask for that information. And then imagine again that we have this historical wiring that changes a threat. So our initial mindset as we're asking these questions is that the change is going to be difficult and costly and weird. And difficult means it's going to be hard. I don't know how to do it. And other people are going to get in the way of me doing it. I just see obstacles, right? Costly, and I'm sure you've run into this so much in doing sales training, on both sides of the equation. Costly means doing this change is going to take from me things I value. Right? And not just time and money, but identity and reputation and power and freedom and all these things I value. We assume this because that's what change has been in the past. And then weird just means strange, feels weird. That's not how we do things around here. Right. So this is our beginning mindset most of the time about change. And then what I noticed, and this is where it got really fascinating, is when people actually did make a change, it's because they shifted their mindset to thinking that the change could be, rather than difficult, it could be easy or at least doable. It could be rewarding, could be more rewarding than costly, and it could even be normal, meaning people like me do it, and people I admire and want to emulate do it, which is why it's so important for leaders to model a change. And I noticed that when that mindset shift happened, and you can tell because people start talking differently about the change, they start saying, well, we could probably do this. And, it's really, I think the customers will really like it. And Joe, who I like a lot, and Amy, who's my boss, they seem to be easy, rewarding, normal, right? Then people, to your point about adoption, then people are willing to actually learn and do the behaviors and operate in the ways that the change requires. And then you can really get adoption and the change can occur.
Wow. There's a lot of good stuff in there. And you know what's really crazy? And I didn't see this coming in when we started our conversation or when I started looking at your materials, but we really do run in very parallel universes here. Because when you describe people have to have some reasons, we actually refer to it as a WIFM. It's an acronym. What's in it for me? Right?
What's in it for me?
So
Exactly.
Unless we address that WIFM, why would I even have a conversation about that?
Precisely.
And that fear of the unknown, it is, I used to say, it outweighs the pain of the present. In other words, we have a problem, but you know what? At this point, I know how to handle it. I know who to call. I know how big it'll be. It's an annoyance, but so far, knock on wood, it hasn't been too big. You present an idea that might be better. What if it's worse? And there's that fear of change of, I think the devil we know, right? I think I'll stay with what we got. So from a sales perspective, it's funny, I'm sort of at another angle. Frequently, we're taking a look at the problem. And even though this person has said, yes, I think we'd like to make a change, a good salesperson in their mind says, yeah, well, if you were that smart, you would have changed already. So we're not going there yet. We're going to go into that problem that you think you might want to change. We're going to attack fear of change by basically going deeper into the problem. We don't have to wait for that big problem to occur. Everybody fixes big problems. The trick is, can we help people fix a problem before it gets big and massive and life altering? And that's where you jump in.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Rob. And so then it was fascinating when I figured out this whole thing about homeostasis and fear of change, and then this change arc, because then I looked back at our change model and I realized that the reason it has worked so well is it integrates the two things you're talking about. It integrates the kind of nuts and bolts aspects of change. Like you actually do have to have a plan and you actually do have to be clear about what you're going to change, with that human side, which is so often not even thought about. Like, how are we going to help people get over that fear of change and see the rewards of the alternative and understand how to operate differently? It's you'll completely resonate with this. A number of years ago, when this maybe 15 years ago, I was really starting to think about change and how it worked. And there, I had a client who had just acquired another company, and they called it a merger like they do, but really he was acquiring the other company. And they had it all figured out, all the nuts and bolts and the due diligence and stuff. And I said, well, so how, he was the CEO. And I said, well, so how are you going to help your folks through this? This is going to be a big change for them. And he goes, no, it's not that big of a change. It's just, we're just acquiring this company. And his name was George. And I said, George, no, it's a huge change. A lot of them are going to be reporting to different people, and they're going to be having new people sitting next to them. And the two cultures of the company are very different. And you really got to think about this. And he goes, no, I don't think so. They'll get with the program. That was his attention to the human side of change, right? And as you might imagine, he was dead wrong, and they lost a lot of their best people, and it took 3 years to get the results that blah, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. But that human side of change that you talk about and that you see all the time in sales training, unless you address that and integrate that fully with the nuts and bolts stuff, it just isn't going to get adopted. It's not going to work. Thus the 70% failure rate,
Yeah. Wow. And you can certainly see it because, we're talking about not only getting people on board, but then, like we said, keeping them on board. There's a lot going on there. Give me that name of that book again.
Sorry, the name of my book?
Yeah, your book.
Oh, okay. It's called Change from the Inside Out. Okay. And the subtitle is Making You, Your Team, and Your Organization Change Capable. And that's really important because as I talked about at the beginning, we're not change capable. We're wired to think change is dangerous. So my book is a way to go through change, but it's not just it's teaching people to fish. It's like, we don't need to just know how to go through one change. We need to know how to go through change, period. And my strong bias is that leaders and human beings and organizations that become fluent in change, capable to change, are the only ones that are going to thrive.
Right. Oh, so let's stay there. Let's talk about the leaders now. Okay.
Yeah.
So you're providing a lot of really good advice here. What advice would you give a leader who's trying to help these people through change? So they're saying, hey, I'm ready to drink the Kool-Aid. Okay. Now what?
Well, they're usually saying, I'm not ready to drink the Kool-Aid. So
we got to get them on board.
You got to get them on board first. So I love that thing that they tell you on airplanes, put on your own mask before attempting to help others. Yeah. Because a lot of times leaders try to lead other people through change without actually making that mindset shift themselves. And we've all heard it, leaders who say things like, well, the C-suite really wants this to happen, so you guys are going to have to use this whole different CRM that we didn't use before. And people are looking at him and going, no way, I'm not going to do that. You're clearly not into it, right? So they have to get themselves seeing the benefit of the change first. You talked earlier about authentic voice. Before they can turn to their people and say, okay, I really think this is a good idea. Let's talk through the challenges and figure out how we're going to do it. Because then once the leader is on board in his or her own mind with the change, then really their core responsibility is to help their people through that change arc. And they have to do that by starting out understanding that fear of change and hesitation about change is normal. Remember, it's historical. It's the normal human reaction. And I think what a lot of leaders do, this is so funny, I've seen it so many times, they go through their change arc, they got on board with the change, and it took them a week or a month or 6 months. And then they turn to their people and they say the change, and the people have that same reaction of like, wait, I think this is going to be hard. I'm not sure how to do it. Oh my gosh, it's going to make me feel dumb. And the leaders are like, you're so change resistant. What's wrong with you? And I always say, they're going through exactly what you went through 2 months ago when you first heard about it. So help them through that. Listen to them, answer their questions, go with them, and then say, okay, how can we make it easier and more rewarding and more normal, right?
Absolutely. Fantastic. One of the things when I was working for Xerox, I was teaching their leadership through quality improvement, problem solving. And it was really this core principle of Xerox trying to, in the 80s in particular, kind of combat the competition that was coming at them following the teachings of Deming and Duran and some of these guys. And Xerox was getting its clock cleaned. And we adapted these principles. But I remember one of the key principles was top-down training, meaning we're not training from the bottom up. Exactly. We're going to start with management. We're going to come
Exactly.
down through there and then get to the people. And
Ex-
so, even for me as a consultant now, again, I'm probably sound pretty cranky and hard to work with, but one of the other Rob isms is I'm not buying this. You're going to put management in the back of the room to observe the sales training, to basically observe their smartphones. No,
Exactly.
you're going to go through these role plays. You're going to go through the discomfort of
Yes.
change.
Yes.
And you're going to be able to look these people in the eye and say, "No, I do know when we changed your golf swing, how uncomfortable that is, because
Yes.
I'm slicing into the bushes too. But we're going to
That's
work together and get that distance and length out of this. But they have to go through it."
100%. Couldn't agree with you more. And in fact, that's the whole, our change model understands that, what you said. And it's a matter of cascading that change through the organization, starting at the top. So let me just go through this quickly. So our 5-step change model, the first step is clarify the change and why it's needed. And that's usually a small group of senior people who, if we're playing our cards right, who go, you know what, we need to, just making this up, change the production process for our core product. It's not working. It's not very efficient. Doesn't take advantage of technology. Okay, so those are the reasons why it's needed. Let's think about that. What are the risks and rewards of changing? Let's get very clear on what the changes we need to make and why it's needed. And if you remember, those are the first two things that anybody wants to know about a change, right?
Right.
So then the next step is, all right, let's envision the future. Let's literally, as a small group of senior people thinking about this, envision the future that this change will bring. Okay, we clear about that? All right, so once that small group of fairly senior people, then the next step is called build the change. And you bring in a change team, like who's actually going to make this happen? It's usually not the senior team. So you have to nominate and bring in like who is actually going to envision and drive this change through the organization. And you bring them into the tent by sharing with them what you've already understood. What's the change? Why is it needed? What's the future? And then you think about other key stakeholders. Is there anybody else that really is essential to this change that we also have to kind of indoctrinate and help them go through their change arc? Then you build, once you've got those people on board, then you build the change plan, the nuts and bolts. How are we going to do this, right? And then step 4, which is the step that never happens almost in organizations, we call lead the transition. And that's where you figure out, oh, this will really resonate with you. You figure out who are the groups in the organization that are going to be most affected by this change and what is going to be hard for them. What are they going to think is difficult, costly, and weird about this? And what can we do to help them move through this change? How can we increase their understanding? How can we clarify the priorities? How can we give them some choices? How can we support them? And you make up an actual plan, a people plan, helping the people through the change. And then you institute the plan, the change plan and the transition plan together. So while you're doing those nuts and bolts things, you're supporting people. And that's where kind of everybody gets brought into the tent, but in this really mindful way where you're helping them understand this is what we're doing. This is why, this is what's going to look like. Here's how we're going to help you. Let's talk. Let's answer your questions. So that by the time you get to step 5, which is what you've been talking about all along, keep the change going, you actually have that critical mass of momentum. Most people are on board. And so you can keep tweaking and making it better so that it keeps working, right?
Right. Wow. There's a lot to that. That's
Yeah.
incredible. It's from a presenter standpoint, a lot of times I'm working with and helping different companies work with on their presentations. And one of the models that I've always used, it's called a UPOP. I won't bore you with it, but the critical elements of this piece are, and let me backtrack just for a second. Can we finally put to bed, tell them what you're going to tell them, and tell them what you told them? My goodness, I learned that in 9th grade. How is that still being slung around as a presentation model? Just listening to you tells me how inefficient that would be if I'm in front of a room trying to help them create change. But some of the critical elements are: 1, that with them again. I'm not bringing you this topic until we clear up what's in it for you to even hear it.
Yes.
2, what do we expect out of you? Again,
Yes.
where's that in telling what we're going to tell them?
Yeah.
Here's exactly what we expect out of you. And a third element is, where's this information coming from and why are you talking about it? So let's there's a few other pieces, but those are some critical pieces of why aren't we clean? It's like a wound. Let's clean this wound up. And we'll dress the wound.
Yes.
But there's so much to change that goes in. And even you talking about, it's funny, kind of step 4, where we're sort of looking for where some of the hesitancy might be.
Yeah.
My sales mind was immediately going, that's funny, because I don't call it step 4, but my step 4 would be figure out where you can anticipate the objections coming from, and don't kick a can and go, we got unlucky. Anticipate and try and be proactive on how you're going to address the objection.
That's exactly right. Assume that there is going to be resistance and hesitancy. Don't just hope somehow magically that there's not, and be prepared to give people the tools, the information, the support, the choices they need in order to move through it so they can actually adopt the change, right?
That's the home run.
Yes, that is the home run. And I want to go back, you've talked about WIFM a lot, and I completely agree with that why. And one of the things we often talk to clients about is, look, don't just focus on your why, focus on their why, what's in it for them. Because, and an example I always give is, okay, let's say you're going to make a change and it's going to make the company more profitable. Okay, so if you're a senior executive and your compensation is tied to profitability, that's probably pretty motivating for you. But if you're a guy on the line or a woman on the line and your compensation is $15 or $17 an hour, independent of how profitable the company is, that's not going to be motivating to you. But maybe the fact that you'll have to do less busy work, or you'll have more time to do more creative stuff, or the customers will like it better, those things might be motivating for people. So make sure that the why is relevant to the folks that you're talking to.
Yeah. We actually, when I do a why, when I go one-on-one, I can understand, I can start figuring out who I'm talking to and address them specifically. But when we have a sea of people, and that's where a lot of people who sell get confused, because they're like, well, I thought it was going to be a one-on-one conversation. Well, no. Now you're in front of a boardroom. Now what are you going to do? It's interesting. We actually attack that why, or that WIFM, in 3 ways. There's 3 of them. It's a personal, how this is going to help you personally, how it will help you on the job, and how it will help your company. And the interesting thing, Erika, is nobody's got a sign on their forehead, but I know I'm taking care of I'll get all of you by hitting all 3 of them. If I just heavy up on how it's going to help the company, well, the CEO's happy, senior management may be happy, but the person on the front line, so we're going to help the corporation. Now, how is it going to help me? And so by attacking all 3, we don't have to worry about which pocket is where. We can sort of throw a blanket over the whole piece.
That's great. I think that's right. And this process for change is by necessity very collaborative. And as you go through the steps, you gather more and more people in and create more and more two-way conversations. And the one of the things that I'm sure you've learned is, even when you're talking to a group of people, you can find out what's important to them by asking them, right? So we really encourage, as you start to understand who are the people who are going to be most affected by this change, talk to them, bring them in. Find a couple of people in that group who you feel like are pretty balanced and are likely to be open to having this conversation, and say, what do you think is going to be hard for you and your colleagues about this? How can we help? What are you going to need differently? Thank you very much. I would not have known that unless you told me, right?
Oh, absolutely. I'll give you a little sneaky secret about corporate trainers. We're not adverse to ice breaking, having some sort of icebreaker, but people always think, well, we're doing that so we can all feel comfortable with Rob. And the answer is, yeah, kind of, but I'm actually inserting questions like, what do you see might be the biggest challenge? So while you're telling me all about yourself, I'm collecting intel on where these pockets might be. So we've warmed up the group, and we've searched for that question that you just asked, which was, okay, where might we fight change? And so so for anybody who's listening, sometimes if you've got the luxury of time, sometimes we only have 10 minutes, but if you've got the luxury of time, always warm up the room, let them introduce each other, and maybe one thing that you're hoping, that you're hoping to get out, or
Yes. Yeah.
sneak that question in there and take good notes, and then just use that as you marry that in with your
100%.
material.
100%. And using that approach kind of writ large, if you're trying to make a whole big change in a whole organization, the wonderful thing is, first of all, when you do that, when you ask the people, how is this going to affect you?
Right.
Part about it. First of all, as you just said, you find out critical information. But even more important than that is one of the reasons that change is so hard for us in a corporate environment is because we feel at the effect of it. It makes us feel helpless and powerless. It's like, I'm just some person in the organization and they're doing this to me.
Right.
So the more you can not just help people feel empowered, but literally empower them, the more they have a voice, the more they have choices, the more they are part of what's happening, the more likely they are to be open to the change and to accept it and adopt it. Hopefully it's a good change and it's necessary. But when people feel like they're part of it, part of the solution, part of what's going to be happening, and that they're being listened to, it really changes. And I'm convinced that the main reason that this awful McKinsey statistic of 70% failure, and it's mostly lack of employee buy-in, it's because it's being thrown on their heads. They're not being involved. People are not being involved in the change, right?
It's almost used like a weapon.
Yeah.
And then if you we're mixing this, well, why don't you let me at least feel like I've got some buy into it? Let me feel like we discovered this. Let me have something. But then there's that wink and that nod of, well, we do this once a year anyhow. So let's just go along with whatever. And so again, implementation kills it on the back end, and a lack of really getting at that, what's in it for them.
Yes.
And some buy-in, even we corporate trainers, what we'll try and do is, even in the icebreaker, we're actually also taking notes to get to hear the way they're phrasing things, their language, so we can use their words while we're introducing this change. You had mentioned, or earlier, John, you had said you were looking for, and what a nice way of getting at it rather than step 4 is, and away we go,
Yeah, absolutely. And as I'm listening to you there, so in step 4, when we figure out kind of what's the transition plan, how are we going to help people get with this and feel good about it and understand how it can benefit them, we have 4 what we call change levers. And you know how levers are force multipliers, right? So what we found is, when you're trying to help people understand and adapt to a change, the 4 most important things to think about are, the first one is increase understanding. People usually have a huge information deficit when there's a change, which is why they hire folks like you. I mean, it's well intended. It's like, help people understand why this is happening and what's in it for them and what led to it, and all that contextual information that people so often don't get, right? So that's thing 1. Thing 2, and this one's really interesting, is clarify and reinforce priorities, because I'm sure you've noticed this. A lot of times when there's a change, people just assume, oh my God, then everything's changing and nothing's the same. And I don't even know what I'm supposed to be doing. And so if you can say, no, your priorities are pretty much the same. It's just this one thing is shifting that's going to help you do that one priority better. So to put it in context and reassure people that no, your job is still your job, and you're still on the hook for what you're on the hook for, that can be hugely soothing and reassuring to people, because otherwise they just think it's, kind of 52 pickup. And then the third thing, and this is what you're talking about, is give control. To whatever extent you can give people choices, how something will happen, how they say it, when they tell their people, in what context, whether or not this thing will unfold in this way, whatever choices you can legitimately give them, that is so helpful. It just, again, then people don't feel victimized. And the last one is give support. And early in a change, mostly what that support is, and I know you know this, is listening. Is just really listening to people, not trying to talk them out of their disquiet or reassure it away. Just take it in, just listen, like, okay, so you're worried about this, or you think this will be challenging. Really listen. And if you really listen to people, then they're ready to hear the solutions. Then they're ready to hear, yeah, this will be challenging. And we have a training program that's going to help you learn how to do this. Yeah, this will take a long time. We're not under any illusions about that. And here are some things we're going to do to make it go faster. So that kind of control and support giving is just absolutely critical.
Right. I'm glad you brought listening up. I have one little survey that I love that a guy named Lou Hampton did, wrote a book called Listening Powerfully. And it was really a terrific book. Read it some years ago. But he tried to figure out, what was the most annoying listening habits? Because, okay, I'm going to listen to you. Go ahead. I'm listening. So, so they tried to figure out, okay. And it came up with a list of 10, and 9 of them together didn't equal the number of votes that the number one piece got. And the number one piece was interrupting me when I'm talking. So the problem is we know, and we know the answer to many of the questions we're asking. Let them speak. So it's listening, and don't interrupt them when they're listening, even if in your brain you're going, this is mind numbing. They're going too long. I already know the answer. Would you like to help initiate change or not? You're going to need to be a good listener. And that means please stop interrupting people while they're answering your questions. Very important.
It would be impossible for me to agree with you more. And not interrupting, especially to try and finish their thoughts. It's like, dude, you don't know what I was going to say, and B, let me say it.
Exactly. Oh, by the way, I show and do a poor job at number 4 on the list, which is, I'm going to tell you because I've done it a few times. Not everything that the person you're listening to has to remind you of a story that you did when blah, 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 blah. So even if you got one, every now and then, let them have their moment and just listen. It's okay. All right. Last question for you. We're going through this thing called a pandemic, if you haven't noticed. And so I'm curious, whenever I speak to anybody on my podcast, one of my last questions is always, okay, well, how's the pandemic affecting you? So the pandemic, what is that teaching us about change?
I think that the pandemic took the brakes off change. And what I mean by that is, remember back at the very beginning, it seems like 15 years ago, I remember the first, I heard that the, World Health Organization said this is a global pandemic. I think it was like the 10th or 11th of March, 2020. And I thought, oh, that sounds terrifying. I wonder what that means. And then the next thing I heard a few days later was that they were canceling the St. Patrick's Day Parade in New York. And I was like, wait, they can't do that. What do you mean canceling the St. Patrick's Day Parade? And then the next day, I heard they were canceling the NBA finals. And then 3 days after that, I heard they were closing all the schools. So it's just like, wait. And it just got worse and worse. And so I think, hundreds of things that we never thought would possibly happen have happened over the last 20 months. So in a way, that's kind of good. Because now we're all going, well, I guess anything could happen. So I feel like there's room for a lot of changes that have needed to happen, whether it's changes in systemic inequities in our culture, or whether it's, the climate crisis, or what, really stuff we got to address, changes we got to make. I feel like there are a lot more people saying, yeah, we probably got to get after that. So that's good. I mean, there's more openness and possibility for change, but at the same time, we've all gone through so much change in the last 18 months that we're kind of freaked out and burned out about it. So it's this funny time where we're less likely to say no, but we're more likely to say no. So it's hard. It's a hard time, you know?
And by the way, I was actually, I have a cruise line that's one of my clients. I was actually out on a ship, a small one, from March 2nd to I think the 8th. And it felt like this thing was trailing the ship. But it was, that was one weird time. Well, also I'm smiling because I'm thinking, look, we're having this wonderful Zoom conversation right now.
Yes.
And the other day, somebody said, I'll call you on the phone. And I didn't mean to be that funny, but I went, what's that again? How do you spell that? Why would I have a phone conversation? And that's how fast we've moved even to that little element, because who was doing this 2 years ago?
Yeah. And we were fortunate because I actually found out about Zoom at an authors conference in 2017, and it became our internal, because my company's located in different places. So it became our internal. So we were really fortunate because when the pandemic started, we already were familiar with the tool and were able to pretty quickly pivot all our offerings to virtual. But even I completely agree with what you're saying, that the speed with which we've shifted shows us that we can make change. We're still scared of it. It still feels dangerous, but we can do it,
Right. Now, Erika, I got to tell you, I remember when one of my kids was telling me maybe 3 years ago, hey, Dad, I'm going to be, 2 days a week, I'm going to be working at home. And I remember snickering, going, working at home. Who does that? Well, welcome to the new world. All right. How do people get a hold of you and hear more about what you're doing?
Okay. I think the easiest way is to go to my website, which is Erika with a K, Anderson with an E.com. So erikaanderson.com. And from there, you can find out about the books and the podcast and my company, Proteus. And that's just an easy door to walk through, I think.
Perfect. And we'll put a link up. And I got the heads up on the Erika, Erika. So just for those of you who heard the K but wanted to know where all the other letters went, that's where they go. Okay. Listen, it's been a pleasure and a special pleasure for me because I got to meet a new member of my community and I didn't know that we were sharing an editor and a publisher. Welcome aboard to Barrett Kohler. Thank you so much for being on the show and just wonderful. I really, I can't always connect what I do with some of the people that I speak to, but wow, we really do a tango together. But thank you so much for being on the show today. I really appreciate it.
This has been a lovely conversation and all this stuff is good. We're trying to help the world, Rob. So this is good.
There you go. You and me. Folks, I'm telling you, we're gonna be saying goodbye, but I don't think we're done talking yet. In any case, we'll do it again as well as we can next time. Until then, everybody, stay safe.
Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please rate and recommend it on iTunes, Outcast, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also get more information on this show and Rob at jollis.com.